So tonight, we'll be discussing the value of studying with experts. You know, this entire pandemic period has been an exercise in adaptability for all of you. And admissions will be watching to see how you've adapted and what you've done to stand out. When I speak to thousands of students from across the country every year, I often get the same question. How do I stand out or differentiate myself as a STEM student during high school? And of course, our primary way to give you a rigorous STEM experience and to make admissions take notice of you is by guiding you through sophisticated science research that leads to regional, national, and happily for many of you, international science competitions. And lots of you will have great success taking that path. However, science research is not the only path to take for an impressive STEM resume. Your generation will be uniquely affected by an extraordinary convergence in medicine, healthcare, AI, robotics, and data science. That kind of understanding will require from you the highest level of achievement and originality in subjects like mathematics, computer science, and the hard sciences. But perhaps your high school only offers AP Calculus, and that's their concession to the future of this convergence. What do? Don't feel trapped. There are mentors and experts in every field you might need for the future, and they're waiting to help you, waiting to teach you the steps towards winning important programming competitions, creating ML capstones, original algorithms, designing apps, or developing sophisticated data science research. And today, I'm going to introduce you to two of those well-known mentors. Listen carefully to what they tell you, because the mentorship and training opportunities they're about to offer will help you take what you've achieved and built during high school and grow it to a completely new level, like pouring gasoline on a fire in a good way. So these are some of the techniques, programs, and training that I use with my own retainer students, and I'm thrilled to unveil them to you today. Now, I am very excited to introduce one of those mentors, Wes Carroll, a specialist in mathematics and computer science from MIT, and as far as I'm concerned, the go-to mentor for the most important mathematics competitions, AMC and AMY. Wes, welcome.
Oh, thanks, Dr. B. It's really nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Such a pleasure. So let's get right into it.
Sure.
What are the AMC and AMY?
Sure. Well, so AMC stands for American Math Competition. Had a different name many years ago. It was originally started in the 1950s. Funny story, it was actually originally started in the middle of the Cold War as the US and Russia were competing to see who had the most gifted young students. What it's evolved into in modern times is a once-a-year competition given in February that attempts to find not just the best trained, but the most creative mathematical thinkers from among high schoolers and advanced middle schoolers across the nation and indeed across the world. And the way it works is that you're given 25 questions. You're given a little over an hour, 75 minutes to answer the 25 questions. And unlike most school exams, where it starts kind of easy and gets kind of difficult by the end, this one starts kind of easy and gets insanely difficult before you're anywhere near the end. And so one of the interesting things about it, of course, is that students who are very accustomed to being able to answer every question that's put in front of them often have sort of an unusual experience when they realize, wait a minute, I'm only on question 20 and I'm already stumped. So it's, on one hand, it can be quite challenging in that respect. But on the other hand, as you well know, if you're not routinely being challenged, then you're not rising as quickly as you could be. So one of the things that's really nice about this competition series is it offers even very gifted students an opportunity to be challenged in an appropriate way right from the start. Anyway, you asked what it is. So it's this series of questions. And once they're scored, the folks who run this exam pick the top 5% of the scorers from across the nation and invite them to do an even more involved exam called the AMI, which is the American Invitational Math Exam. And they cull out, the top students from that, and this process continues like a tournament until what you have left are the people who wind up representing the United States at the International Math Olympiad. And the folks who wind up going on to the International Math Olympiad tend to become famous in their own right in the sciences and in math. But for our purposes, I think it's worth pointing out that even the very top American universities are usually very interested in knowing how well you did on the first level of the competition, simply because it's already hard enough to separate, the very creative, very high potential students from people who are merely pluggers, who have merely done some studying, but don't really have the same love of this and the same sort of raw talent, if you will.
Perfect answer, perfect, and very interesting for our students. So how has preparation for these exams changed in recent years? Because everything else has.
It's really true. One of the big trends that's happened this year has really been a continuation of a trend we've seen for the last 5 or 10 years. And what's really happened is, I mentioned that this exam started in the 1950s. But if you go back and look at some of the early years, just as with the SAT, for example, the competition that they were giving many years ago looks very different from the competition they give today. So one of the things that's been really interesting is that for the first few decades of the competition, it evolved very slowly. And what we saw is in relatively recent years, preparation for this exam has evolved very quickly, and the exam has had to evolve along with the increasingly competent competitors in that same way. So to unpack that a little bit, back when I was in high school in the 1600s or whatever, the only way that you could prepare for these exams would be to look at some of the past exams, try some of the questions yourself, and ask yourself questions like, okay, what are they getting at here? What sorts of things do I need to know? What might I explore? That sort of thing. And that was all well and good. But in the last 20 years, we've seen the rise of online communities that share a lot of information and that talk with each other. And it's not just about classes and mentoring and so on. It's also about peer-to-peer sharing of, hey, how did you do problem 13? Oh, I did problem 13 in this way. Oh, did you check out that website? It shows you how to do problem 13. Oh, let's talk about that. So because there's so much more of this conversation that's happening around this stuff, we're finding that all the potential competitors are becoming skilled much more quickly. And I think although Khan Academy has played a part in that, and there are certainly sites like brilliant.org that have played a part in that, I think it's pretty uncontroversial to say that the art of problem solving, which we also think of it as AOPS, artofproblemsolving.com, which is run by Richard Russick and his team, has been sort of the center of this sort of bringing together of all these competitors. So you'll find, for example, if you go Googling around, that there's a bunch of wikis and other resources, many of which are run by AOPS, that help one to become sort of savvy about what sorts of questions get asked and what sorts of thought processes work well. There is a downside to this trend, though, that's worth mentioning, which is that when the entire encyclopedia of what is possible becomes published and publicly available, there's a natural trend for competitors to simply want to memorize the publicly available encyclopedia.
You bet.
So the trend I've seen is that among serious competitors in recent years, the proportion of them who simply aim to do all the problems and remember them has gone up markedly. Now, that's not to say that I think that's a winning strategy. It's just to say that it's a strategy that has become possible, and some people have decided to take that as far as they possibly can. Now, if you're a student who happens to be especially good at memorizing a bunch of stuff and finds the idea of doing 1,500 math problems to be a delightful vacation for your, whatever, more power to you. But for the rest of us mere mortals, I think that one is wise not to go down that particular rabbit hole unless it plays to your strengths and your preferences. And so what I've seen in recent years is students who make a really concerted effort to understand, okay, what are my strengths in this competition? Okay, what are my weaknesses? Will I get more value out of strengthening my strength or shoring up my weaknesses? Because it's not the same for all of them. Let's try and understand this generally. Let's figure out where the strengths are, figure out how to leverage them, and really focus on that, such that when I show up at the competition, I haven't spent hundreds or thousands of hours memorizing all the things that might happen. I've spent dozens to 50 to maybe 100 hours thinking through my own strengths and weaknesses, thinking through how I'm going to leverage those things. And then when I get the questions, no matter what gets thrown at me, I know which ones I'm going to be good at. And the beautiful thing is that because the questions are so difficult, you don't need to get all of them. If you can identify, okay, these are the ones I'm going to be really great at because I'm either naturally good at it or because I've shored up and I've studied these things, great, I'm going to answer those. And by the time I'm done answering them, time's going to get called, and it's okay that I left some other ones unanswered because, again, I don't need 25 out of 25. I need 16 out of 25, and then I'm in the top 5%. So there really is this strategic shift that we've been seeing in recent years where some of the competitors are going this sort of memorization route, and other ones are really digging deep on how do I know what I'm good at? How do I think? And how can I then improve these things that these properties I already know I have? Does that make sense, or is that a little bit too in the weeds, as it were?
No, actually, that was perfect. I think that answers, a multitude of questions for students. Now, let me ask you, how does AMC prep differ from ACT or SAT prep?
Oh, well, I guess the biggest way is, this is going to sound a little bit funny, but for very strong students, the memorization approach really can work very well for SAT and ACT. Because in those, I'll take the ACT in particular because it's especially well suited to just memorizing a bunch of stuff. Generally speaking, if you're going into an ACT and you're already scoring, let's say, a 28, a 30, a 32, something in that range, well, that probably means you already know most of the rules of grammar that they're testing. You already know most of the math that they're testing. You already know how to read charts and graphs for the science section. Like a lot of the stuff that a lower score would need to learn, you've learned as part of your normal schooling. And therefore, it just makes sense to say, great, of all the things they're trying to test me here, what are the ones I don't already know? You could probably list those out on a couple sheets of paper. Great, just go learn those. I mean, I make it sound simpler than it is, but from a strategy point of view, it really can be that simple. Whereas on the AMC, it really would take hundreds, if not thousands of hours to take that approach, which is why the students who take that approach are doing this and very little else, right? They're not sort of well-rounded students doing a bunch of different things. They're very, very narrowly focused on this thing. So I think that's the main way in which the AMC is different. The one other way is that since the AMC is intrinsically very difficult, it's meant to challenge even very strong students. The AMC represents an opportunity to see how you really do under fire, if you will, in a way that the SAT and the ACT really don't. I mean, sure, in the ACT and the SAT, there is time pressure, right? But the pressure that the fire that the ACT subjects you to is, can I answer relatively easy questions for 4 hours straight without making a mistake or letting my attention slip? Whereas the AMC is asking you, can you bring the full power of your creative thought to something you've never seen before for an hour and for 75 minutes straight? And it's just a very different kind of challenge. And for my money, sure, in life, you will sometimes be called on to pay attention to something boring for 4 hours straight. A much more valuable life skill is, can I be super creative on demand with something I'm not familiar with? That's a life skill. So that's another important difference in my view.
That's a great answer. The test athlete over the natural creative thinker. Very good. So how does preparing and succeeding on these math competitions help differentiate a student for college admissions? There's a question all of my students ask.
Sure. So I have to sort of expose a particular bias that I have when I answer this question because in the past, MIT is one of the schools that enlists its alums to interview potential new students. And so I did that work for something like 5 years as a volunteer some years ago. And I was always in conversation with a bunch of friends of mine who were also doing that work. So we would have our various interviews and we talk about them amongst ourselves, not exposing any names or anything, but just to kind of get a sense of, okay, what sorts of trends are we seeing? Because we took it very seriously as, okay, we're helping to choose the people who are going to have this bond with us as alums later, who are we trying to choose? And what we found was that so many of these students felt that their job was to check a bunch of boxes that other people had defined for them. That, okay, I've got to do this and I've got to do this and I've got to do this and I've got to do this. And if I do all these things, then everything is going to be good. And I mean, a lot of them thought that for pretty good reason. I mean, that is certainly an aspect of what we need to do for applying to college. But the thing that really differentiated a lot of those students for my little cohort of interviewers were the students who had a real passion for something and had really pursued it. And it almost didn't matter what the passion was. Like, okay, it's great that you love physics or whatever, but it's also great if you love scuba diving, right? But like, how far into that area of interest can you go? What can you do with it? I'm remembering, in fact, one particular interview I had where there was a particular video game. I think it was Minecraft, but it hardly matters, right? And the student says, oh, this is a thing that I really love. And I'm thinking, oh boy, this is going to be a terrible interview. But as we're talking about it more and more, this is a student he's not just playing this video game, he's rewriting parts of it and he's sharing it with middle school students and he's, finding all these other friends in far-flung countries through it. And it was like, oh, all right, now it's interesting, right? Because it's not about the game, it's about your love of all the things that it can do. So, okay, so why is the AMC important? I think a big reason why it's important is that not only does it show that you really know what you're doing with respect to not just math, but problem solving in general. That's a big part of it. But the other reason it's important is that it's pretty easy for an admissions officer to tell the difference between someone who's done it the encyclopedia way and someone who simply learned to get better at problem solving. And I think that's incredibly, incredibly valuable. Most of the schools that I would be interested in the problem solvers. I'm sure that there are other schools who very much value sort of the encyclopedia type thinkers. For example, med students, right? People who are going to go on to med school, there's an enormous amount of stuff you have to memorize there. And so I could see how an undergraduate institution that's going to be a stepping stone to med school will say, okay, you memorize the ways you can do it, more power to you. That's what we need in this context. But just the fact that it touches on these two very, very difficult to do things and evaluate students through those lenses accurately, right, makes it enormously powerful. And that's why the MITs and the Caltechs and the whatevers of the world ask for AMC scores, because they know you can't fake it. And they know that if you just beat your head against it until you're successful, then you have spent an enormous amount of time and effort and energy and grit getting there. And either way, I think that's a real badge of honor.
I love that answer. We could have an entire webinar just on that question. I have very strong feelings about that as well, but we won't right now.
Fair enough.
The next question, how does the AMC prep relate to career goals or life goals? Because to many students, that's where it's at.
Yeah, that makes sense. And here's where, again, a particular bias of mine is going to come through. So anytime you're preparing for something like this, no matter how you do it, I think that there's enormous value in doing something that's hard enough that you're not sure you're going to succeed. That's the first thing I'd say about this. It's like, you want to make the all-state team in whatever. For almost no one is that a guarantee. It's going to be a lot of a heartache and heartbreak and hard work to get to that point. And the same is true for the AMC. So in that sense, just trying at something that you might fail at, I think is enormously powerful. One, it helps to build humility, of course, but two, it helps you to find some hidden strengths you might not otherwise know about. And it helps you to build sort of the workaday skills that let you do hard things in your career. Because who among us wants to have a career where everything is easy? Like, where's the fun in that? Like, let's do something that's interesting, and interesting often means challenging. So in that sense, it's super helpful. The other way is it helps you learn how you learn when there isn't a teacher. Even when I'm coaching someone for the AMC, I can't give them all the answers. I can't give them all the structure. The main way in which you learn to get good at this stuff is you try some stuff and you critically analyze, what did I do well and what do I need work on here? And that kind of self-evaluation of really digging deep and looking at what you did and being honest with yourself about what's good and what kind of stinks and needs work. Boy, I mean, my students tell me that that is a piece of our work that continues to apply in their daily lives, even when they're long past grad school.
Excellent. Wes, clearly you're a terrific educator. So I'm going to ask you, what else should our student audience know about the different STEM or test training that you provide?
Sure. Well, I'm happy to, gosh, I'll keep it to just a minute or two because I know that we have a limited amount of time. But I think the most important thing I would want students to know is that gaining more knowledge is different from understanding your own strengths. And that very often the students that we're most successful with, and I think the students that gain admission to some of the top schools, are the ones who can tell the difference between, oh, in this situation, I don't really understand what's happening in this class so well. I need an expert who can tell me how to do chemistry, who can tell me how to do physics, who can tell me how to do the calculus, all that sort of thing. Versus the situation where the student realizes, you know, I feel like I kind of understand the calculus and I'm still not doing well on the tests. And I'm not really sure why. I wonder what's going on. That ability to distinguish between I need to learn more math and something else is going wrong here is so, so important. So one of the first things that we do when we have a new student come to us is we try to be really specific about, okay, what is it that you need? Yes, you've come to us because you want to get a 5 in AP Calculus BC, or you're having trouble in your pre-calculus honors class, or whatever it is, right? You're getting ready for the AP biology test. But what parts do you really need help with? What parts can you handle on your own? And what are the parts where actually if it's going to go wrong, it's going to go wrong in this way. Awesome. Let's know that from the beginning and let's prevent that bad outcome right from the start so that you can feel like you're sailing through by the time we get to the test.
Perfect. Intuitive teaching. That's great.
I guess that's a way to put it. I hadn't thought of it that way, but I like that.
It is intuitive teaching. And that's from the students I know who work with you. That's what I hear.
Oh, that's wonderful.
So,
thanks.
Sure. Speaking of that, if students are interested in working with you or working toward math competitions, what should they do?
Sure. The easiest thing to do is just get in touch with us directly. If you go to wescarroll.com/start, that's a great way to do it. Or if you're just interested in learning more about the AMC in general, you can go to wescarroll.com/AMC. We've got some great information there. And honestly, if you want to just drop me a line, I'm wes@wescarroll.com, and I'm always happy to hear from new folks. And in fact, my phone number is on the website, wescarroll.com.
Perfect. Wes, thank you so much for your graciousness in giving time to talk to our students and teach them all these opportunities their mathematical ability can open up for their young lives, and of course, for college admissions. Well, guys, you've all just heard from 2 exceptional mentors. And I hope this webinar has opened up your eyes to the ways you can learn and differentiate yourself for the future. Plato was onto something when he suggested that knowledge was more than information. Rather, it comes from understanding how to ask and respond to interesting questions, to learn how to learn. Be smart with your high school career. It's precious. Take advantage of learning how to learn now for the future. We're counting on you. Thank you again to our guests, our expert mentors, and thanks to all the students for tuning in. Talk soon.